It is 11 at night. You are sitting in the dark in front of your glowing screen, surrounded by 20 open browser tabs. Your eyes are burning, your shoulders carry a dull ache, and your mind feels completely full yet entirely empty. You have spent the last 4 hours jumping frantically from an urgent work email to a short entertainment video, to a depressing news article, and back to the email again. You finally close your laptop feeling utterly exhausted, but deep down, you know you have produced absolutely nothing of substance today. Or perhaps your struggle looks slightly different. It is a quiet Sunday afternoon. You finally sit down with that heavy, important book you have been meaning to read for months. You read the exact same paragraph 3 times, but your brain flatly refuses to absorb the words. Instead, you feel a phantom itch in your hand. It is a desperate, unconscious urge to pick up your smartphone and check for digital notifications that do not even matter. You fight it for a brief moment, but then you easily give in. 30 minutes vanish instantly into a bottomless, mindless scroll. When you finally lock the screen, you feel a quiet, crushing sense of shame. It is a heavy realization that you are slowly losing your grip on your own precious attention span. You watch other people articulate clear thoughts, build complex arguments, or master difficult skills, and a cold panic sets in. You seriously wonder if your brain is permanently broken. You wonder if the constant, deafening noise of the modern world has finally eroded your ability to think deeply about anything at all. You think you are just tired from a long week. You think you just have a naturally short attention span. You tell yourself that you desperately need a new productivity application, a more rigid time management system, or perhaps some expensive vitamin supplement to magically fix your focus. You falsely believe that if you just push yourself a little harder, you will eventually break through the heavy mental fog. But you are terribly wrong. The real problem ruining your peace runs far deeper than a simple lack of caffeine or willpower. You are not broken. You are just applying the wrong method to a soul that was beautifully designed for something entirely different. You are constantly treating your mind like a chaotic public train station. It has become a loud place where cheap information rushes in and out without leaving a single trace of wisdom. And over 700 years ago, the most brilliant mind in the entire history of the Catholic Church diagnosed this exact spiritual and intellectual crisis with terrifying precision. His name was Thomas Aquinas. He is a celebrated doctor of the Church, a towering giant of medieval philosophy, and perhaps the greatest human master of deep work who ever lived. He wrote millions of words by hand, constructed philosophical arguments of breathtaking clarity, and masterfully synthesized the wisdom of the ancient world with the divine revelation of Jesus Christ. But Thomas was not simply born with a magical, flawless brain. He deliberately cultivated his mighty intellect through rigorous, highly intentional daily practice. And by the grace of God, we know exactly how he did it. One day, a young, deeply overwhelmed Dominican monk named Brother John wrote a letter to Thomas. John was struggling immensely. He desperately wanted to acquire the precious treasure of knowledge, but he felt completely lost in the vast, overwhelming ocean of information. He honestly did not know where to begin his studies. Thomas, despite his incredibly busy schedule, wrote a short, profound letter in response. It contains 16 highly specific, immensely practical rules for thinking clearly, studying effectively, and mastering the unruly mind. In a few moments, we are going to look closely at 5 of those ancient remedies that will completely disrupt the way you approach your daily work. They include a radical shift in how you view your physical space. They include a ruthless, unyielding rule about what you allow into your ears. And they include a severe warning about the deadly, modern illusion of shallow learning. This famous historical letter is known in Latin as De Modo Studendi, which translates simply to On the Method of Study. But in his other massive theological works, Thomas also thoroughly addressed the underlying spiritual disease that constantly destroys our focus. He called this specific vice curiositas. This is a word that means the restless, disordered, and endless appetite for useless information. It is a sickness that completely starves the human soul of actual, saving truth. Before we begin unpacking this powerful medieval letter, I want you to do something very specific right now. Write one single word in the comments below. Just one word. Tell me the dominant emotion you feel most often when you sit down to do deep, meaningful work, but find yourself immediately distracted by the noise of the world. It could be frustration, emptiness, inadequacy, deep anxiety, or something else entirely. Name it bravely, because naming the specific flavor of your intellectual distraction is the absolute first step toward conquering it with grace. And at the end of this video, you will come back to that exact word and see if something inside you has shifted. Then, I ask you to hit the like button. Do not do it to feed a digital algorithm. Do it as a small, deliberate act of humility. Let it be a physical acknowledgement that you truly need to reclaim your God-given mind from the endless noise of this age. That small act of agreement is already the first step out of the trap of distraction. And if you have not subscribed to this community yet, do it right now. This is a place where the ancient wisdom of the Catholic saints meets the bleeding wounds of modern life. And real intellectual healing is never the easy kind. Now, let us journey back 7 centuries and discover what Saint Thomas Aquinas knew about building a resilient mind that we have completely forgotten. Thomas Aquinas lived in the vibrant, turbulent heart of the 13th century. It was an era of explosive intellectual revolution across Europe. The newly discovered philosophical works of Aristotle were pouring into the great universities of Paris and Naples. The academic world was loud, crowded, and aggressively competitive. Thomas was not hiding in a quiet, isolated cave in the mountains. He was constantly traveling across countries, advising popes, and engaging in fierce, high-stakes public debates. He was constantly surrounded by political intrigue and endless theological controversies that could easily break a lesser man. Yet, in the very midst of this overwhelming daily noise, he maintained an inner silence that was absolutely unshakable. Historical witnesses tell us that his focus was practically supernatural. He frequently dictated his massive philosophical treatises to 3 or 4 different secretaries simultaneously. He would move seamlessly from one complex argument to another without ever losing his train of thought. He wrote millions of words by hand, constructing arguments of breathtaking clarity. He achieved a level of intellectual output that modern scholars still find completely staggering. And he did all of this without a single digital productivity tool. We often suffer from a deeply arrogant assumption about the past. We picture medieval monks as simple men who mindlessly copied dusty manuscripts in dark, damp rooms. We assume they had absolutely nothing interesting to distract them. But this is completely false. The human mind has always been fiercely drawn to distraction. Thomas was an elite architect of cognitive mastery. He understood the fragile mechanics of human attention far better than any modern technology executive. When the young brother John wrote to him, desperately asking how to navigate the overwhelming sea of knowledge, Thomas did not give him empty spiritual platitudes. He gave him a rigorous, timeless psychological framework. To truly understand his brilliant advice in the letter De Modo Studendi, we must look at how Thomas analyzed the mind in his masterwork. In the Summa Theologiae, specifically in the Secunda Secundae, question 167, Thomas investigates a fascinating and highly relevant vice. He calls this vice Curiositas. Today, we generally think of curiosity as a wonderful, entirely positive trait. We actively encourage it in our children and heavily praise it in our modern schools. But Thomas sharply defines curiositas as a dangerous spiritual sickness. It is the disordered, restless, and insatiable appetite to consume information that does not lead to virtue or ultimate truth. It is the constant wandering of the mind toward useless novelties simply to satisfy a superficial, temporary itch. It is the desperate desire to know other people's business, to consume endless rumors, and to fill the silence with meaningless chatter. Stop for a moment. Be completely honest with yourself right now. Look closely at your daily habits. When you spend 2 hours mindlessly scrolling through short videos, are you actually seeking the truth? Or are you just feeding the hungry beast of curiositas? Are you trying to learn? Or are you just trying to escape the terrifying silence of your own soul? Thomas passionately contrasts this modern vice with the beautiful, stabilizing virtue of studiositas. Studiositas is the intense, disciplined application of the mind to things that truly matter. It is not about how many heavy books you can read in a single week. It is not about how many educational podcasts you can proudly consume at double speed. It is strictly about the moral character and the ultimate direction of your attention. We suffer from a massive modern misunderstanding about the very nature of focus. We stubbornly treat human attention as a purely economic resource. We falsely believe that we need to concentrate better merely so we can get promoted, earn more money, or crush our professional competitors. We eagerly consume endless self-help content looking for quick, superficial mental hacks to maximize our daily output. But Thomas vehemently insists that your attention is not just a cheap tool for corporate productivity. Your intellect is the very image of God imprinted upon your immortal soul. Your attention is deeply sacred. When you carelessly fracture your attention, you are not just hurting your earthly career. You are actively damaging your ability to perceive reality and to hear the quiet voice of God. You are willingly choosing to live in a chaotic train station instead of a silent archive. In a bustling train station, thousands of faceless people rush past each other. Loud announcements blare continuously. Heavy trains arrive and depart, and absolutely nothing is ever permanent. There is constant, dizzying motion, but there is absolutely no peace and no deep understanding. This is exactly what your mind looks like when you constantly switch between trivial tasks, urgent notifications, and cheap digital entertainment. You are packing your fragile mind with loud passengers who simply do not belong there. But Thomas teaches that the human intellect must be treated like a highly protected, sacred archive. In a true archive, every single piece of knowledge is carefully examined before it is allowed inside. It is properly categorized, deeply understood, and reverently stored. It becomes a permanent part of your intellectual architecture, not just a passing shadow, what the angelic doctor diagnosed through brilliant theology in the 13th century. Modern empirical psychology has completely validated today. Neuroscientists now know beyond any reasonable doubt that human brains are incredibly plastic. Every single time you give in to a random digital distraction, you are literally wiring your physical brain to become more easily distracted. You are physically training your neural pathways to aggressively crave the cheap, unearned dopamine rush of novel, useless information. Modern cognitive researchers officially call this severe condition cognitive overload and continuous partial attention. They strictly warn us that multitasking is a biological myth that aggressively destroys our working memory and our capacity for deep empathy. Thomas knew this grim reality intimately, long before the invention of the modern brain scan. He deeply knew that the human soul possesses a finite, strictly limited amount of spiritual and mental energy. When you exhaust your precious cognitive resources on the trivial noise of the modern world, you have absolutely nothing left for the profound truths of heaven. The ancient letter to Brother John is a desperate rescue manual for the overloaded mind. You have been telling yourself a very comforting lie for a very long time. You tell yourself that you are constantly learning because you listen to educational audio at double speed while washing the dishes. You proudly think you are growing intellectually because you consume endless 10-minute summaries of profound historical books. You mistakenly believe that because your eyes are constantly scanning text on a glowing screen, you are actually acquiring real knowledge. But Thomas Aquinas saw completely through that exact kind of intellectual vanity over 7 centuries ago. Every single time you consume vast amounts of shallow information without stopping to actually digest it, you are not learning. You are simply drinking salt water to quench a deep intellectual thirst. You are stuffing your mind with cheap cognitive calories that leave your soul entirely malnourished and exhausted. You are slowly building a fragile illusion of competence that will instantly collapse the moment you are asked to explain a complex idea. You confuse the mere possession of disconnected data with the actual possession of deep wisdom. And before you close this video in anger, before you think I am just here to harshly judge your modern habits, let me say this very clearly. I struggle with this exact same daily temptation too. We all do in this incredibly loud digital age. This is absolutely not an accusation coming from a place of arrogant moral superiority. It is a desperately needed spiritual diagnosis that includes every single one of us. We are all silently drowning in the exact same ocean of endless, meaningless noise. Perhaps you are thinking something like this right now. But I live in the 21st century, and my modern job requires me to constantly check my email. I cannot just abandon my daily family responsibilities and hide in a silent monastery to read thick theology books all day long. If I do not keep up with the endless flow of daily information, I will surely fall behind my peers and fail in my career. And there is absolutely some real, practical truth in that valid concern. I am certainly not preaching complete social isolation or the total, unrealistic rejection of modern technology. But there is a massive, life-altering difference between responsibly managing your daily duties and voluntarily surrendering your sovereign mind to a digital algorithm. The tragic difference is precisely what Thomas identified when he warned young brother John about the hidden dangers of a scattered intellect. You falsely think your scattered focus is just the unavoidable cost of doing modern business. But your fragmented attention is actually the heavy spiritual price you pay for deeply disordered loves. You are constantly prioritizing the loud, artificial urgency of the present moment over the quiet, eternal demands of ultimate truth. Stop for a moment and look at the brutal reality of your daily life. Why are you so desperately afraid of pure silence? Modern psychology tells us that we constantly seek out distraction because we are terrified of being left alone with our own unresolved thoughts. We actively use loud podcasts and endless video streams as a thick emotional shield against our own underlying anxiety. Thomas Aquinas understood this exact human weakness perfectly, without ever needing a modern psychological degree. He knew that when the mind is empty of virtue and divine contemplation, it desperately seeks to fill the painful void with earthly noise. You are not just struggling with a simple time management problem or a minor productivity issue. You are actively avoiding the heavy, uncomfortable silence where God actually waits to heal your deepest spiritual wounds. You are running away from yourself, and you are using cheap digital information as your preferred escape vehicle. Thomas fiercely understood that true knowledge is never just passively consumed like a cheap entertainment product. True knowledge must be actively conquered through the painful, slow, and often frustrating process of deep contemplation. When you endlessly consume shallow content, you are actively choosing the chaotic train station over the silent, sacred archive. In the loud train station of your daily digital feeds, information simply arrives and departs without ever fundamentally changing who you are. You read a shocking internet headline. You feel a brief surge of cheap emotional outrage. And then you immediately forget it. You are constantly in frantic motion, but you are going absolutely nowhere of actual value. Your soul gradually becomes a busy, noisy waiting room for fleeting thoughts that do not even belong to you. You completely lose the beautiful capacity to sit quietly with a difficult concept until it finally reveals its hidden meaning. Thomas explicitly warns that a mind constantly scattered across 1,000 trivial things cannot possibly gather itself to behold the face of God. Because God does not normally speak in the frantic, scrolling chaos of the busy train station. He speaks in the quiet, ordered stillness of the protected archive. He speaks when the heavy doors are finally closed to the frantic noise of the world and the human mind is finally still. The modern world desperately wants to keep you distracted because a distracted soul is incredibly easy to manipulate and control. But Thomas wants to make you dangerously free by teaching you how to fiercely protect your own precious attention. So, how do you actually close those heavy doors and protect your inner intellectual sanctuary? How do you break free from the exhausting chains of modern distraction and build a mind capable of holding real truth? Thomas Aquinas left us 16 specific rules in his famous medieval letter to Brother John. But we can distill his profound wisdom into 5 highly practical, deeply transformative principles. These are 5 ancient remedies that you can begin applying today to completely rebuild your shattered focus. The first profound remedy from the famous medieval letter is surprisingly simple and deeply humbling. Thomas tells the young monk to choose to enter by the small rivers and not right away into the sea. He knew perfectly well that the human ego always wants to conquer the most difficult and glorious things immediately. We falsely believe that we can master complex theology, deep philosophy, or advanced professional skills without ever learning the boring, basic logic first. We desperately want to swim in the grand, endless ocean of profound wisdom. But we arrogantly despise the slow, muddy, and tedious streams of fundamental learning. We want the intellectual reward without the painful intellectual discipline. You buy 3 thick, complicated books on a highly difficult subject, expecting instant intellectual mastery. You eagerly read for 2 solid hours. You become completely confused by the heavy terminology, and then you angrily quit forever. You blame your own intelligence, But your intelligence is not the problem. Your deep lack of intellectual humility is the real obstacle. Thomas says you must stop this intellectual pride immediately. Start very small today. Read one single page of a foundational text and understand it completely before turning to the next page. Build your solid intellectual foundation brick by brick and patiently accept the slow process. The second ancient remedy requires you to fiercely protect your physical environment. Thomas writes to John, "Love your cell." If you desire to be admitted into the wine cellar, for a traditional Dominican friar, the cell is his small, private room of intense prayer and rigorous study. It is the absolute physical boundary of his precious silence. It is the fortress that keeps the chaotic world outside. Today, you desperately try to do deep, meaningful work at a messy kitchen table. You leave the television playing loudly in the background, your smartphone constantly buzzing with notifications, and you unjustly blame your tired brain when you inevitably fail to focus. You must intentionally create a dedicated physical space for your deep focus. It absolutely does not need to be a beautiful monastery or an expensive, perfectly decorated home office. It can simply be a tiny, clean desk in the quiet corner of your bedroom. But when you sit in that specific chair, the smartphone must stay completely outside the room. Make that small physical space a highly protected, almost sacred sanctuary for your attention. Treat your focus as something incredibly fragile that deserves a proper, heavily guarded home. The third remedy might sound incredibly harsh and deeply antisocial to our modern, highly connected ears. Coming from a famously charitable and loving canonized saint, it is the absolute last thing you would expect him to say. But do not skip ahead, because this single rule is the ultimate secret to preserving your mental energy. Thomas strictly warned the young student to inquire nothing about the daily doings of the world. He explicitly commanded him to completely ignore worldly gossip, useless rumors, and irrelevant public news. He knew that the human mind simply cannot hold the noise of the world and the silence of God at the exact same time. Thomas knew perfectly well that your human cognitive bandwidth is severely limited. You start your early morning by anxiously reading the trending political arguments on social media. You willingly fill your pristine morning mind with the angry, toxic opinions of complete strangers about distant events you cannot possibly control. By noon, your cognitive energy is completely drained, and you have absolutely nothing left for your real duties or your family. Go on a strict, ruthless information fast today. Stop checking the daily news cycle and social media feeds for one entire week, and strictly observe how quickly your deep focus returns. The fourth ancient remedy transforms exactly how you store information inside your head. Thomas says to lay up everything you can in the cabinet of your mind, exactly like a person aiming to fill a vessel. He strongly warns against the modern, lazy illusion of shallow memorization. True learning requires deliberate, painful mental organization. You read a brilliant self-improvement book. You excitedly highlight 50 different sentences. And 2 weeks later, you cannot remember a single core concept. The loose pieces of information are simply floating aimlessly in your busy, chaotic train station, waiting to be quickly forgotten. Stop for a moment and strictly test yourself right now. Can you clearly explain the core argument of the last book you read to a 10-year-old child? When you learn something new today, force yourself to explain it out loud in your own simple words. If you cannot explain it clearly without looking nervously at your notes, you do not actually understand it at all. Connect the new, difficult idea to something you already know intimately. Turn your scattered, messy mind into a beautifully organized, silent archive where every truth has its proper place. The fifth and final remedy addresses a dangerous spiritual heresy that many hardworking modern people secretly believe. We often treat our physical bodies as heavy, annoying burdens that simply get in the way of our soaring intellects. We foolishly sacrifice our precious sleep to study or work late into the dark night. We eat terrible, cheap food while staring blindly at our glowing screens for 10 hours straight. But Thomas Aquinas knew deeply that the human soul and the physical body are profoundly united. He famously prescribed a warm bath, a glass of wine, and deep sleep to cure severe spiritual sorrow. He firmly knew that a physically sick, chronically exhausted body absolutely cannot support a vibrant, healthy, and focused mind. The Catholic tradition deeply honors the physical body as a temple. You must go to sleep at a decent, regular hour tonight. Treat your physical body as the sacred, fragile instrument of your eternal soul, not as a machine to be ruthlessly exploited for maximum productivity. Intellectual endurance absolutely requires physical health, and true grace always builds upon strong nature. If this profound analysis is beginning to illuminate something hidden in you, subscribe to this community, because here we do not do surface-level content. We bring the rigorous wisdom of centuries to deeply heal the chaotic wounds of today. You do not need to read 100 books this year to be wise. You absolutely do not need to consume cheap digital information at double the normal speed to prove your intelligence. The profound wisdom of Saint Thomas Aquinas from 7 centuries ago remains the ultimate remedy for our modern intellectual sickness. You must humbly start at the small streams before arrogantly jumping into the deep, dangerous ocean. You must build a highly protected physical and mental space for your fragile focus to grow. You must ruthlessly cut out the loud, useless noise of the daily secular world. You must intentionally organize your passing thoughts into permanent knowledge and treat your physical body with the profound dignity it truly deserves as a sacred temple. So I ask you a very direct question right now. Which of these 5 ancient remedies do you desperately need to apply today? Which one have you been completely neglecting because it feels too difficult or too boring? Do not try to implement all 5 of them at the exact same time. Choose just one specific remedy today. Take one small, highly intentional step away from the overwhelming noise of the modern world. There is absolutely nothing more spiritual than being fully human. And Saint Thomas Aquinas understood that beautiful reality perfectly well. If your mind is completely exhausted by the news, turn off your smartphone notifications for the next 24 hours. If your physical space is chaotic, spend exactly 10 minutes cleaning your desk tonight. Now go back to the comment you wrote at the very beginning of this video. Look at that one single word you typed. Write a second word directly underneath it. Name the specific emotion you feel right now. Maybe it is exactly the same. Maybe something inside your heavy chest has finally shifted. Notice the difference and let that simple awareness guide your next steps. If this profound historical message woke something deeply true inside of you, hit the like button right now. Do not do it as an empty digital gesture, but as a firm declaration that today, something within your mind begins to radically change. Share this exact message with someone who is carrying the exact same heavy burden of modern distraction. Send it to a friend who desperately needs to hear that the deepest intellectual tradition of our ancient faith has real, practical answers for their daily pain. Not cheap platitudes, but real, rigorous answers. And subscribe to this community if you want to continue this quiet journey into the ancient wisdom of the saints. It is finally time to close the heavy, iron doors of your mind to the chaotic public train station. Let the loud, rushing passengers of cheap information depart without you. You do not belong in the noise anymore. Step slowly into the breathtaking, silent archive of your own God-given intellect. Let the ancient, quiet truth take deep root in your soul, where nothing trivial is ever allowed to disturb your profound peace. May Saint Thomas Aquinas intensely intercede for you today. May you find in his rigorous medieval wisdom a bright light for your modern darkness. And may you always remember that you are a beautiful union of body and soul, and God loves both infinitely. This is a place where the wisdom of the saints meets the wounds of today, where truth is spoken even when it hurts, where healing begins not with easy answers, but with honest ones. Welcome home.